Welcome to the Tough Decisions Network. This is our special Friday edition called Flashback Friday, where we recap the lessons learned from the interviews from the current week. Be sure to visit toughdecisions.net for links to each of the episodes that we covered today. Also, sign up for our free weekly entrepreneur email. Before we get started, let's hear from one of our sponsors. Have you ever thought about investing in real estate, but find yourself so busy that you don't have time for it? Do you have FOMO, which is the fear of missing out? At HanfordCapital.com, we help investors with passive real estate investments that project better returns than traditional investment vehicles such as the stock market. If you'd like to find out more about our passive real estate investments, visit HanfordCapital.com. That's HANDFORD Capital.com. We will jump on a call with you to discuss your investment goals and to see if our investments are a good fit for you. This advertisement is not to be construed as an offer or recommendation to buy or sell a security. Visit HanfordCapital.com.
Welcome to today's episode of the Tough Decisions podcast. This is our Flashback Friday episode, and this is Dennae. I'm going to talk to you just a little bit about some of the highlights from our week and give you a brief preview of this weekend's podcast that'll be coming up. We've had a really good week on the Tough Decisions podcast. We get to interview some really great people. This week, all of the guests were particularly interesting and had a different perspective from each of them, so I think you'll find each of the episodes helpful and interesting. What I want to do here is just kind of review who we interviewed and then give you some of the highlights of those, pique your interest a little bit, and then prompt you to go and get those complete episodes to listen to. We had 4 guests with us this week. On Monday, episode 88, we interviewed Clayton Morris. If you recognize that name, he is a former Fox News anchor. On Tuesday, episode 89, we interviewed Hadar Orkibi. On Wednesday, episode 90, we interviewed Justin Grimes. And on Thursday, episode 91, we interviewed Patrick Fitzgibbons. And as I mentioned, each of them brings with them a different perspective. They're all in different places in the market and different experiences, so all very interesting to listen to and to talk with. On Monday, as I mentioned, we interviewed Clayton Morris. He was a former Fox News anchor, and we talked to him just a little bit about his experience there and why he decided to move into real estate as a full-time gig, if you will. And he mentioned, the great experiences that he had at Fox, but because of the political climate and some of the things that have just happened recently, he said, it got to the place where it just really wasn't fun anymore. And so he decided at that point that he wanted to move out of that and to move into real estate. And so he talked to us about some difficult decisions that he had made. And one of them that he mentioned was, the decision of having to break ties with a partner that his company had been working with. His company is called Morris Invest, and they had been working with another company kind of as a partner in some things, and some information came to his attention that really called into question the other company's ethical decisions. And so he said at that point they had a difficult decision to make. Were we going to continue to work with this company or not? Were we going to break ties over this questionable behavior and questionable decision making? And, he talked us through about how they saw that decision, and then eventually, of course, they decided to break ties with that company. But that was an interesting thing to hear from him on, because, we've talked to investors before about having to break up with a partner, or having to break up and end a partnership maybe that had been in existence since the beginning of the company. But this was a little bit different type of scenario, and so it was interesting to hear his take on that. He also talked to us about the role that his wife plays in the business, and that was, of course, interesting for me to hear specifically. He and his wife have a really great relationship and a great balance when it comes to their business, and he talks about her being sort of the executor of his great grand ideas, and so that was neat to hear from him as well. The name of his company is Morris Invest, and then he also talked about the new company that will be starting this fall called the Financial Freedom Academy, and that'll be launching in October, I believe, and so he talked to us and sort of previewed that. And so I'd really encourage you to go and grab that episode 88, and Clayton Morris. Then Tuesday, we talked to Hadar Orkibi, and Hadar is originally from Israel. He is now living in New Zealand, and he has just fairly recently, started investing in the United States. And so he definitely was very interesting to talk to, as he's had experiences all over the world. And as I mentioned, currently lives in New Zealand, has decided to invest in the U.S. And so he was able to talk to us about how to begin investing in a market that is essentially unknown, and because that's really what it was to him when he started. He also talked about his strategies for making difficult decisions, and he said, he likes to look at it as what's the best case scenario, what's the worst case scenario, and then what is going to be the average outcome, so to speak, like what is likely to happen. And I, of course, asked him, based on that decision-making model, well, do you have a worst-case scenario sort of bottom line that you will go for? In other words, does it have to meet a minimum standard before you will proceed? And so he gave an interesting answer to that question as well, and I'd challenge you to go and listen. He gave us some tips on beginning investing in an unknown market, and I think the bottom line, or the best tip that I got from him, was that you need to pick a market and really focus on one place, because, when you pick a place to invest like the United States, there's so many good markets, so many markets to choose from. And then, of course, of those markets to choose from, there are good markets, there are not so good markets, and then there are really bad markets. And so he said for him, it was a lot to focus on just by saying you're going to invest in the United States. He had to pick one or two markets and then really spend time and energy cultivating relationships, networking, understanding the city and the market, what was available there in that market. And so instead of focusing on really, really big, huge chunks of information, he was able to narrow it down. And of course, as he has experience and as he continues to grow, then he will expand those markets. But to start with, he had to really pick one or two main places to focus in order to make it something that was manageable and something that he could really do a good job at. One other thing about Hadar that I enjoyed was hearing him and hearing him just talk about his heart for people. And, we asked him, as we have on a lot of episodes, what was one of the things that he's been able to do with the money that he's earned. And he talked about how his family traveled to India and they met a man there, someone they had never met before. And they have since been helping to support this individual and helping him to get an education. And so that was really neat. And you could tell he was really excited about that opportunity that he had and was really proud of that accomplishment. Then on Wednesday, we interviewed Justin Grimes. And Justin got into real estate because he started helping his mother after the death of his father. So kind of a tragic thing there that pushed him into real estate, but he needed to help his mom. And so he started researching, learning, and eventually, investing in real estate for her and then for himself. And one of the things that Justin talked about was an early mistake that he made when he got into a deal with a wholesaler. And the thing I appreciate about Justin is that he talked about this mistake that he made, but then he really gave us a solution to the problem. And so it was neat to see how he worked through that. And he talked a lot about being able to control the alignment of interest. In particular, when you're working with people who you don't know very well or you've never worked with before, having that alignment of interest is really, really important so that you can make sure that, that person that you're working with has the same goals that you do. In this particular instance, he got into a deal and he didn't realize that the wholesaler had an upfront fee that he was going to have to pay. And so once that was paid, in the end, he didn't end up making, in fact, I think he probably lost money, if I remember correctly, on this particular deal. But as he stated, and as we've talked about before, it's one of those things where you wouldn't go back and redo because of the lessons that he's learned. And he's actually come up with kind of a new or different model of purchasing that has allowed him to keep the interests aligned with these wholesalers so that he can make sure that the deals they're bringing to him are actually really good deals and not just something that they're trying to unload and get their money back on. So really interesting conversation with Justin, and I appreciated his perspective on that. Also how he really worked to come up with a creative solution to a problem that I think more than he has had. Multiple people probably run into those kinds of issues, and here he has found really a creative solution to it. He also talked about balancing a W-2 income and working on his own, the importance that he places on getting feedback from other people, especially his wife, when he is making decisions. And then finally, on Thursday, we interviewed Patrick Fitzgibbons. That was episode 91. And Patrick is a law enforcement officer. He worked in the military for a while and then moved into law enforcement. And he talked about several difficult decisions that he's had to make in his career as a law enforcement officer. One of them was, learning to let people go as he moved up and as he gained more responsibility. There was a time when he and his friends were peers, and then there were times when he was over his friends. And so he was having to learn how to let go of people when the situation called for it. He also talked about law enforcement officers and the difficult decisions that they face on a daily basis in the use of force. And I thought, when I was listening to this again, a lot about the book that I've been talking about on Sundays, because the use of force is a decision that has to be made very quickly, and it has to be an instinctive decision, really, and you really only get one chance at it. You can't rethink it or redo it. And so the training that's necessary to make those kinds of decisions second nature is very, very important for our law enforcement officers, and he talked about that. For him, he said that the most difficult decision that he makes on a regular basis is time management. And as a full-time law enforcement officer and someone who is doing his own podcast and has some pretty lofty goals in that realm as well, you could tell that he had come up with ways to really make the best use of his time and to make sure that he gets all the things that are important to him in while still having time to work and promote his podcast. And he's talked about writing a book and that kind of thing. So he's using his time wisely, not just, talking about time management, but actually implementing these strategies to use the time wisely and get the things done that he wants to do. He also talked about his decision-making strategy of getting feedback from multiple people as being really, really important. So that was our week on the Tough Decisions podcast. Clayton Morris, Hadar Orkibi, Justin Grimes, and Patrick Fitzgibbons. Really great week. Lots of good feedback, good interviews. And so we're looking forward to another great weekend as well. Tomorrow, Dan's Step Up Your Game with Dan episode, we'll talk about asset protection for startups. And he has an interesting guest on that I don't think you will definitely not want to miss. Listening to them talk about how to protect your assets, specifically when starting up a new company. Then my episode on Sunday, we're talking again about the book Blink and thinking without thinking. This week, we'll be looking at the dark side of thin slicing and the different ways that our adaptive unconscious can either be interfered with or possibly even trick us into making a bad decision. And if we're going to use the thin slicing and this ability of our brain to make good decisions, then it's imperative that we understand the ways in which it can be tricked or short-circuited, if you will. And so join us on Saturday with Step Up Your Game with Dan, and me on Sunday with Survive and Thrive with Dennae. And then next week, we'll have another full week of interviews with you. Thanks for joining me, and have a great weekend.
Thank you for listening to the Tough Decisions Network. Be sure to visit toughdecisions.net to gain access to show notes for this episode and to join our free weekly entrepreneur email, where we will send you news about the latest technology for your business, inspiring quotes, and the latest books for entrepreneurs. That's toughdecisions.net.